June 25th, Mark Rutte, the Secretary General of NATO, appeared on Fox News and told millions of Americans watching the United States had used military bases in Italy and Romania to launch hundreds of bombers against Iran. He said this proudly, like it was proof that the Western alliance was stronger than ever. A few hours later, Italian Foreign Minister Antonio Tajani walked out in front of the press and said, very simply, no, we never authorized that. We never participated in any military action against Iran. Italy's Defense Minister Guido Crosetto confirmed the same thing. Clear, unambiguous, on the record. Two of the most senior officials in the same alliance, the same day, directly contradicting each other on live television. Now I want you to sit with that for a second, because I'm going to ask you a question that most people aren't asking. Is this a miscommunication, or is this something far more serious than a miscommunication? And here's what makes this even stranger. On the exact same day, the same June 25th, something else was happening on the other side of the world. 6 Gulf states, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Qatar, Kuwait, Bahrain, and Oman all came out to welcome the peace agreement between the United States and Iran. These are the countries that Israel spent 4 decades trying to pull into its corner to isolate Tehran. These are the countries that were supposed to be on Israel's side. In one single day, Israel lost both things at the same time, its alliance in the Gulf and its alliance in Europe. The mainstream media is covering these as 2 separate stories. But they are not 2 separate stories. They are one story, and that story is showing us that the American empire is fracturing in ways that very few people are actually recognizing. In the next 20 minutes, I want to walk you through exactly what is happening. I want to show you the hidden mechanism underneath all of this. And most importantly, I want to show you who is actually winning. Because it is not who you think it is. Okay? Let's go. To understand why the Italy situation matters so much, you need to understand one fundamental thing about how empires actually work. And I mean this very specifically, not in an abstract philosophical way. I mean this in a very practical game theory sense. An empire does not need to be strong. It needs to look strong. This is what the Americans call the aura of power, the projection of invincibility that makes other countries calculate that the cost of defying you is simply too high. And here's the key insight. That aura does not collapse when your enemies attack you. It collapses when your allies start contradicting each other in public. Okay? So let's look at exactly what happened on June 25th. Mark Rutte on Fox News. The United States used bases in Italy and Romania to conduct bombing runs against Iran. He said this like he was celebrating a moment of NATO unity. Italian Foreign Minister Antonio Tajani, same day, Italy never participated in any military action. We never authorized the use of our bases for combat operations against Iran. Full statement. On the record, Italian Defense Minister Guido Crosetto, same position, confirmed it, no ambiguity. Now this is not a small disagreement. This is the Secretary General of NATO saying something that a full member state of NATO publicly called factually incorrect on the same day at the same level of visibility. That is not a miscommunication, that is a rupture. And here's the question that matters more than anything else in this story. Why? Why did Italy choose this moment to go public with a denial? They didn't have to. They could have stayed quiet, like most other NATO allies did. So why didn't they? There are 2 layers to the answer. And I want to give you both because understanding these 2 layers is what separates a surface level analysis from a structural one. The first layer is domestic politics. Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni was under enormous pressure from the Italian parliament and Italian public opinion. Italians did not want to be dragged into a Middle Eastern war. If Rutte was telling the truth, if Italy really did provide its bases, and Italy admitted that, Meloni's government could collapse. So she had to deny it to survive politically. But the second layer is much deeper, and this is the part that almost nobody is reporting correctly. Iran responded immediately. Deputy Foreign Minister Kazem Garibabadi cited United Nations General Assembly Resolution 3314, the definition of aggression. The resolution states clearly that a state which allows its territory to be used by a third party to commit acts of aggression against another country is itself guilty of an act of aggression under international law. Do you understand what that means? Italy and Romania are facing potential international legal liability. And to protect itself from that liability, to protect itself from being named as a party to aggression under international law, Italy had no choice but to deny, even if it meant contradicting the NATO Secretary General on live television. This is Iran using international law as a weapon, and it worked, because now Italy has officially gone on record denying any involvement, which means Iran can point to that denial and say even your own allies are distancing themselves from what you did, okay? That's a very sophisticated move. Now I want to give you the concept that ties all of this together. I call this the facade alliance. And let me explain exactly what I mean. When smaller countries join an alliance with America, they're not doing it because they share the same values. They're not doing it because they believe in liberal democracy. They're doing it because the cost of saying no is too high. They're afraid of economic sanctions. They're afraid of diplomatic isolation. They're afraid of losing security guarantees. This is an alliance built on fear, not loyalty. And here's what that means in practice. When the empire is strong, when the cost of defying America is very high, the alliance looks solid. Everyone stays in line. But when the empire starts to weaken, when the cost of loyalty begins to exceed the benefit, members start looking for exits. And the safest way to exit is not direct confrontation. The safest way to exit is plausible deniability. You just say you weren't there. Italy did exactly that on June 25th. And this is not an isolated incident. This is the first visible crack in what I'm calling the facade alliance. But it is not the biggest crack. The bigger one, the one that is far more historically significant, is happening somewhere else entirely. To understand what's happening in the Gulf right now, you need to understand a strategy that Israel has been pursuing for over 40 years. Because what we're seeing today is not random. It's the result of a very specific strategic logic that has just failed in the most spectacular way possible. Since the Islamic Revolution in Iran in 1979, Israel has had one central strategic objective: isolate Iran. The logic is simple and elegant, actually. If you cut Iran off from the rest of the Muslim world, especially from the wealthy Gulf states, you dry up the money that funds Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis, all the proxy groups. No money, no proxies. No proxies, no regional threat. That was the theory. And to a significant degree, it was working. The Abraham Accords in 2020 were the high point of this strategy. The UAE and Bahrain normalized relations with Israel, building what looked like a genuine anti-Iran coalition in the region. Saudi Arabia was moving in the same direction. It seemed like Israel's 40-year strategy was finally paying off. And then Israel decided to escalate, not just diplomatically, militarily. They pulled the United States into a direct war with Iran. They continued bombing Lebanon on a near daily basis. They struck Iranian nuclear facilities. The calculation was a decisive military victory will lock in Gulf support and permanently cement the anti-Iran coalition. Here's what CNN and the BBC are not telling you directly. That calculation was catastrophically wrong, and it backfired in exactly the opposite direction. Let me give you the specific evidence, because in my analysis, I never want to just assert things. I want to show you exactly what happened and let you draw your own conclusions. On June 25th, Secretary of State Marco Rubio flew urgently to Kuwait, then the UAE, then Bahrain. He met with Gulf Cooperation Council ministers in Bahrain. Now, here's what I want you to notice. The official framing of his visit was that he was there to reassure Gulf partners about the U.S.-Iran Memorandum of Understanding. Think carefully about that word, reassure. He was not there to enlist their support. He was not there to strengthen a coalition. He was there to reassure them. That is the language you use when you're afraid your allies are losing confidence in you. That is a fundamentally different posture. And listen to what researchers with direct access to Gulf policymakers are actually saying. Farah Al-Kawasmi from the Gulf Studies Center at Qatar University told Al Jazeera, and I'm quoting this carefully, "The ongoing conflict compelled the Gulf states to pursue a more pragmatic relationship with Tehran, one that will include enhanced dialogue to deter conflict. A more pragmatic relationship with Tehran. That is diplomatic language for Israel. Your strategy has failed. The Gulf states are not moving toward Israel. They are moving toward a modus vivendi with Iran. And the numbers from within Israel tell the same story. A poll published during these days showed that 92% of Israelis felt that the United States had just signed away their victory. And nearly half said Israel should continue attacking Lebanon regardless of American objections. Even Prime Minister Netanyahu and Defense Minister Katz publicly declared, even if America asks us to withdraw from Lebanon, we will not. This is Israel openly defying the country that provides its weapons and its diplomatic cover. We have not seen this level of open defiance in the modern history of this alliance. Now let me give you the framework that explains all of this. I call this the Alliance Inversion Effect, and this is where game theory becomes extremely useful. In game theory, we study what happens when one player in a system escalates beyond what the other players can tolerate. And here's the consistent finding. When a state uses force beyond the threshold that regional partners can accept, those partners don't rally to that state's side. They calculate that being associated with that state makes them a target, and they start moving toward the opponent to protect themselves. Let me make this concrete. The Gulf states are not moving toward Iran because they love Iran. They are moving toward Iran because they are terrified of being caught in a war that Israel is dragging the entire region into. Iran is their neighbor. They have to live next to Iran forever. They cannot afford to let Israel's wars become their wars. And here's the critical insight. For the Gulf states, a negotiating Iran, an Iran that is open to deals and revenue sharing, is far less dangerous than an uncontrollable Israel that might drag them into a conflict they never wanted. This is not sentiment. This is pure strategic calculation. Now here's the part of this story that I think is the most underreported. And I want you to pay close attention here because this is where the future is actually being negotiated right now. While Rubio was running around the Gulf trying to reassure everyone, Iran was making a completely different kind of pitch to some of those same Gulf states. And that pitch was this: let's make money together from the Strait of Hormuz. Iran has been building what it calls a maritime service fee system for the Strait of Hormuz, charging all ships passing through for security, safety, and environmental services. Iran's estimate of what this system could generate, approximately $40 billion per year, to be shared among the coastal states that participate. And this is not just talk. Iran and Oman have already established a joint working group to define the management mechanism. Iran's Foreign Minister Araghchi met directly with the Sultan of Oman. These are not preliminary conversations. These are structural negotiations about who controls and who profits from the world's most important shipping lane. Rubio rejected this proposal, calling it a dangerous precedent that would lead to, and I'm quoting him, complete chaos. He and the GCC foreign ministers issued a joint statement rejecting any Iranian attempt to impose fees or control the strait. But here is the question I want you to sit with. If you're Qatar, if you're Kuwait, and on one side you have Marco Rubio telling you to reject the Iranian proposal, and on the other side you have Iran offering you a share of $40 billion a year, while also demonstrating that it can attack a Singapore flag cargo ship in what was supposed to be a UN-approved safe corridor, what is your actual calculation? How reliable is the American security guarantee starting to look? Iran doesn't need to win the war militarily. Iran just needs to win economically. And the Hormuz fee system is the instrument designed to do exactly that. Now, I want to do something that I think is critically important in any serious analysis. I want to steelman the opposing argument. I never want you to just accept what I say. I want you to hear the strongest possible case against my interpretation, and then decide for yourself. Here is the counter-argument, stated as strongly as I can make it. The Gulf states welcomed the US-Iran deal because they want short-term economic stability, not because they are genuinely moving closer to Tehran. Italy denied involvement in Iran strikes for domestic political reasons, not because NATO is structurally fracturing. All we are seeing is individual states acting in their immediate self-interest. There is nothing systemic happening here. This is a reasonable argument, and it has solid historical precedent. In 1966, France under de Gaulle withdrew from NATO's integrated military command structure. It was a dramatic break, and yet NATO survived. 60 years later, France is still a full member. Allied disagreements don't necessarily mean systemic collapse, but here is what that counter-argument cannot explain. In 1966, France withdrew, while the Soviet threat was existential. Every NATO member still needed the alliance because the alternative, Soviet domination of Europe, was worse. Today, the situation is fundamentally different. America is visibly weakening domestically. Inflation in May 2026 hit its highest level in 3 years, a 4.1% PCE reading. 60% of American voters say the Iran war was not worth it. The domestic political base for sustained engagement in the Middle East is eroding, and Iran is not an existential threat to the Gulf states the way the Soviet Union was to Western Europe. Iran is a neighbor. You cannot permanently isolate a neighbor. You have to find a way to coexist. The Gulf states understand this in their bones. And when Iran comes to them with a $40 billion revenue sharing proposal, while the American security umbrella is visibly leaking, that is not a short-term calculation. That is a structural shift. Now, I want to shift your focus completely. Because while everyone is watching Iran and Israel, while all the cameras are pointed at the Strait of Hormuz and the negotiations in Islamabad, there is a country sitting very quietly in the background that has made $2.3 billion in additional oil and gas revenue in a single month without firing a single shot. That country is Russia. Here's how this works. When the Strait of Hormuz is blocked, when 20% of the world's oil supply suddenly cannot reach markets in Asia, India, Europe, energy prices spike globally. And when energy prices spike globally, every barrel of oil that Russia sells becomes more valuable. Russia doesn't need to do anything. The disruption does the work for them. But Putin wasn't just sitting back and collecting money on June 25th. He was actively expanding Russia's position while America was distracted. Let me walk you through what he was actually doing. Putin was wrapping up the Russia-ASEAN summit in Kazan, where he and the leaders of 10 Southeast Asian countries signed what they called the Kazan Declaration, locking ASEAN into Russia's expanded Eurasian Partnership Initiative. More specifically, Russia signed an energy cooperation agreement with ASEAN, positioning itself as a reliable alternative supplier of LNG and fertilizers at exactly the moment when the Middle East disruption was causing a global energy crisis. And this is the move that I think shows you how strategically Putin thinks. He ordered the release of 24 Filipino citizens who had been detained in Siberia for 9 months. He did this right after a bilateral meeting with Philippine President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. at the summit. The Philippines is a treaty ally of the United States. And Putin just made a goodwill gesture directly to the Philippines president on the sidelines of a summit designed to pull Southeast Asia closer to Russia, while America was too busy managing the Iran situation to pay attention. Does that make sense? Can you see the chess game that's being played here? And it doesn't stop there. Russia has resumed construction on the Rasht-Astara Railway, part of the north-south transport corridor connecting Russia to Iran through the Caucasus. Russian engineers returned to the Bushehr nuclear power plant in Iran to complete reactors 2 and 3, which had been delayed by the airstrikes. Russia is methodically tightening Iran's economic dependence on Moscow, not through military force, but through infrastructure and technical cooperation. Iran needs Russia's railways, Russia's nuclear technology, Russia's energy markets, and Russia is delivering on its own terms. Now we come to the part of this analysis that I personally find the most significant. And I want to be direct with you. This is the connection that I think almost no major media outlet is making correctly. Because everyone is focused on the drama of the US-Iran negotiations, and they are completely missing what China is doing in the background. On June 25th, 2026, the exact same day that Rutte and Tajani contradicted each other on live television, the exact same day that the Gulf states welcomed the US-Iran deal, China's National Development and Reform Commission published its 15th five-year plan for energy system transformation. Let me give you the specifics, because specifics matter. Clean energy to reach 30% of electricity generation by 2030. Heavy-duty trucks running on new energy to account for 40% of new truck sales by 2030. 9 major heavy industries, steel, cement, oil refining, coal power, to cut carbon and reduce energy consumption under 2026 to 2028 action plan. The central government providing 20% subsidy on total investment for approved projects. And simultaneously, at the World Economic Forum Summer Davos in Dalian, the 17th annual meeting of new champions, Premier Jiang delivered a keynote introducing what he called China Opportunity 2.0. The argument China's technological development empowers the world, it doesn't threaten it. Chinese products in emerging technology sectors are tools of empowerment for the global south, not competitive threats. And President Xi Jinping met with Bangladesh's Prime Minister Tariq Rahman in Beijing and elevated their relationship to what they called a community of shared future for a new era. Do you see what China is doing? While the United States is spending, by some estimates, $40 billion just in the initial phase of the Iran military campaign, while America is burning through diplomatic capital on every front simultaneously, while American inflation hits its highest level in 3 years, China is quietly laying the industrial and diplomatic foundation for the next decade. While America is fighting the last battle, China is building the next economy. And China's silence on Iran is itself a strategic statement. China expressed support for the Islamabad Memorandum of Understanding and called on the U.S. to implement its commitments. China condemned American unilateral sanctions. China positioned itself as a defender of international law and Iranian sovereignty. All of this without committing a single soldier, without spending a single dollar on military operations, and without making any enemies in the region. This is what Sun Tzu meant by the supreme excellence of winning without fighting. And China is executing it with almost perfect precision. Now let me put everything together, because here is where the full picture becomes visible. And when you see it, it's actually quite striking. Let me show you where each player stands on June 25th, 2026. America, spending $40 billion on a war, inflation at a 3-year high, 60% of its own voters saying it wasn't worth it, its NATO allies contradicting each other on television, its Gulf allies quietly opening channels with Iran, and it still has $39 trillion in national debt that it needs the world to keep financing. Iran proposing a $40 billion per year fee system for the Strait of Hormuz, building a joint working group with Oman, framing everything in the language of international law and coastal state rights, and having successfully shifted the Gulf states from isolation to pragmatic engagement. Russia, earning an additional $2.3 billion a month from elevated oil prices, signing the Kazan Declaration with ASEAN, relocking Iran into Russian infrastructure dependency, and picking off American allies one goodwill gesture at a time. China, saying almost nothing, spending almost nothing on this crisis, and launching the most ambitious industrial transformation plan in its history at exactly the moment when America is most distracted. Now, in 1999, 2 colonels in the People's Liberation Army, Jiang and Wang Xiaoshui, published a military theory called unrestricted warfare. The central argument was this: a militarily superior power cannot be defeated through conventional military means, but it can be defeated if you force it to exhaust its resources across multiple fronts simultaneously: economic, diplomatic, legal, psychological, until it can no longer sustain the cost of empire. What I'm calling the minimal consumption strategy is an application of that logic. And here is how you can see it operating in real time across these 4 players. Iran is playing the frontline role, directly creating asymmetric pressure through drone attacks, maritime disruption, the Hormuz fee gambit, and legal warfare. Russia is playing the support role, profiting from energy disruption, expanding diplomatic influence in Asia, deepening Iran's dependence on Moscow. China is playing the inheritance role, quietly building structural economic power while the hegemon is distracted. And none of these 3 need to coordinate formally. Their interests overlap enough to produce natural coordination. Here is what makes it so effective. None of these moves look individually decisive. Russia signing a declaration with ASEAN, not a war. China publishing a 5-year plan, not a threat. Iran proposing port fees, not an invasion. But collectively, they are applying pressure at every single point where American power is vulnerable: its economy, its alliances, its energy dependence, its domestic political cohesion. And America has to respond to all of it simultaneously with a military doctrine designed for the Cold War and an economy already stretched to the limit. Through June 25th, 2026 is what I would call textbook day of this strategy in action. First, Romania. NATO named both Italy and Romania as countries whose bases were used for Iran strikes. Italy denied it publicly. Romania has stayed silent. Watch what Romania does next. If Romania also publicly denies, NATO's internal credibility problem becomes significantly more serious. If Romania stays silent indefinitely, that tells you it's under pressure from both sides and doesn't know which way to go. Either outcome is a signal worth tracking. Second, Qatar and Kuwait. Rubio reassured them. But $40 billion a year from the Hormuz fee system is a very large number. Watch for any signal from Doha or Kuwait City that they are willing to participate in a joint management framework with Iran for the Strait. It doesn't have to be a dramatic announcement. It could be something as subtle as declining to sign on to future anti-Iran statements at GCC level, or agreeing to bilateral working groups with Tehran on maritime issues. Those small signals will tell you the real direction of travel. Third, US 10-year Treasury bond yields. Trump is trying to suppress oil prices through what the Wall Street Journal described as jawboning, using social media announcements and market expectations to push prices down without actual policy action. If 10-year Treasury yields move above 5.5%, that's a signal that markets are losing confidence in America's post-war economic plan. And if that happens, the pressure on the Iran deal intensifies dramatically because America needs that deal to work in order to get energy prices down and stop inflation from becoming a political catastrophe before the midterms. If you want to verify these ideas yourself, and I always encourage you to check my analysis against your own reading, I'd suggest 3 things. 1. Read the Italian Foreign Ministry's official statement from June 25th carefully. Pay attention to the specific language they chose. It's a masterpiece of saying no without creating a formal diplomatic incident. The phrasing is itself a lesson in how weaker states navigate between competing powers. 2. Look up UN General Assembly Resolution 3314 on the definition of aggression. Read Article 3. That is the specific clause Iran is using against Italy and Romania. When you understand what that clause says, you'll understand why Italy had no real choice but to deny. 3. Read the U.S. Bureau of Economic Analysis report on May 2026 PCE inflation, specifically the breakdown between goods and services. The headline number of 4.1% is important, but the core services number tells you the inflation is not just about oil, it's structural. And structural inflation is much harder to fix with a peace deal. And as always, push back on me if you think I've gotten something wrong. I genuinely want to hear it. The only way I get better at this is by encountering arguments I haven't thought of. When European allies are publicly contradicting NATO, when Gulf allies are opening channels with Iran, when Russia is profiting from a war it never entered, and when China is building the industrial infrastructure of the next decade in complete silence, the real question is not who is winning this war. The real question is, can America maintain the aura of power that its entire alliance system depends on? The sense that the cost of defying America is too high. When the evidence accumulating in real time suggests that the cost of staying loyal may now be higher than the cost of quietly looking for alternatives. I'll see you in the next one.